Have you ever noticed how quickly the mind can make a decision about who you are? You make a mistake, forget something important, say the wrong thing, miss an opportunity, and before the moment is even over, a voice shows up with a story. There you go again. You should have known better. Why do you always do this? For many of us, that voice has been around for so long that we barely notice it anymore. It sounds like us. It uses our voice. It knows our history. It remembers the embarrassing moments, the failures, the regrets. And because it's so familiar, we often assume it's telling the truth. But lately I've been wondering about that. What if it isn't telling the truth? What if it's simply telling a story? And what if that story has been repeated so many times that we've stopped questioning it? Inner dialogue is one of those things that's constantly present, yet strangely easy to overlook. We're always listening to ourselves think, but we don't often stop and examine what's actually being said. That's worth paying attention to because the conversation happening inside our heads doesn't stay inside our heads. It shapes how we feel. It shapes what we attempt. It shapes what we avoid. Sometimes it even shapes what we believe is possible. What's interesting is that most of us never consciously chose this inner dialogue. Nobody decides they're going to spend the next few decades criticizing themselves. Nobody intentionally sets out to become their own harshest judge. More often, these voices are inherited. A comment that landed at the wrong moment. An expectation we absorbed without realizing it. A criticism we carried longer than we meant to. A painful experience that quietly became part of the story we tell ourselves. Over time, those moments accumulate, and eventually the story begins to sound like our own voice. I've noticed that the mind has a strange habit. If it hears something often enough, it begins to treat it as truth. Not because anyone proved it, not because it was carefully examined, simply because it's familiar. Think about a song you've heard hundreds of times. You don't have to concentrate to remember the lyrics. They simply show up. Negative self-talk can work the same way. The thoughts become automatic, not because they're accurate, because they're practiced. And that's an important distinction. Sometimes we spend years trying to change circumstances while never noticing the narrator commenting on those circumstances. Something goes well. The voice says it was luck. Something goes wrong. The voice says it was your fault. Someone offers a compliment. The voice dismisses it. Someone offers criticism. The voice stores it away for future reference. It's a remarkably one-sided conversation. And after a while, it can become exhausting. I don't think the greatest cost is emotional discomfort. I think the greatest cost is limitation. When a voice constantly tells you that you'll fail, eventually you stop reaching for certain things. When it tells you you're not capable, certain possibilities begin to disappear from view. When it tells you you're not worthy, you can start treating that opinion as a fact. And that's where the real trouble begins. Because an unexamined thought can quietly become an identity. The good news is that the shift doesn't have to begin with changing the voice. In my experience, it begins with noticing the voice. Just noticing it. Not fixing it. Not fighting it. Not trying to replace it with something positive. Simply hearing it. The moment we become aware of the commentary, something interesting happens. A little space appears. Before that moment, we are immersed in the thought. After that moment, we're listening to the thought. It's a subtle shift, but it's an important one. There's a difference between saying, "I am a failure," and noticing, "I'm having a thought that says I'm a failure." One feels permanent, the other feels observable. And once something becomes observable, it becomes easier to question. That's where curiosity can enter the picture. Is this actually true? Where did this idea come from? Would I speak this way to someone I care about? Has this thought earned the authority I've given it? Sometimes those questions are enough to loosen the grip of an old story. Not because the story disappears, but because we stop assuming it's the final word. From there, a few practical tools can help. One is reframing. Not positive thinking, not pretending everything is fine, just looking at a situation from a slightly wider angle. Instead of, I always mess things up, perhaps it's, I made a mistake. Instead of, I'll never figure this out, perhaps it's, I haven't figured it out yet. The circumstances haven't changed, but the relationship to those circumstances has. And sometimes that's where movement begins. Another practice that has become increasingly important to me is self-compassion. Not because it's soft, because it's effective. Many of us learned to motivate ourselves through criticism. We assumed harshness created growth. But when you think about the people who helped you most, they probably weren't the people constantly reminding you of your shortcomings. They were the people who saw your potential while also acknowledging your humanity. The people who allowed mistakes without turning them into identities. Most of us already know how to offer that kind of understanding to others. The challenge is remembering to include ourselves. There are other approaches too. Some people work with affirmations, not as magic phrases, but as a way of introducing a different possibility into the conversation. Others challenge their thoughts directly, asking for evidence instead of automatically accepting conclusions. And the environment matters. The conversations around us often become the conversations within us. The people we spend time with matter. The media we consume matters. The emotional atmosphere we live in matters. None of these things completely determine our inner dialogue, but they certainly influence it. And perhaps that's why awareness is so important. Because awareness gives us a choice. Without awareness, we simply inherit the conversation. With awareness, we can begin participating in it. I don't think the goal is to become relentlessly positive. Life isn't always positive. Some days are difficult. Some losses hurt. Some fears are justified. The goal isn't to deny reality. It's to stop adding unnecessary suffering to reality through the stories we automatically tell about it. That's a very different thing. A challenge is one thing. A challenge accompanied by an endless internal commentary about why you'll never overcome it is something else entirely. One creates difficulty, the other creates exhaustion. And maybe that's what many people are feeling. Not the challenge itself. The exhaustion of carrying an internal critic everywhere they go. At some point, it's worth asking a simple question. Is this voice helping? Not because it's bad, not because it's wrong, but because it's influential, and influential things deserve our attention. The beautiful thing is that awareness changes the relationship. You don't have to win an argument. You don't have to force yourself into positivity. You don't have to become a different person overnight. You simply begin listening more carefully. You begin noticing. You begin questioning. And in that space, something new becomes possible. Perhaps the most important realization is this. You are not every thought you think. You are not every judgment that appears. You are not every criticism that passes through your mind. Those thoughts may visit. Some may stay longer than others, but they are not the whole of who you are. So the next time that familiar voice begins its commentary, maybe don't rush to silence it. Just listen. Notice what it's saying. Notice how often it repeats itself. Notice how many of its stories you've accepted without question. And then ask yourself something simple. If this voice weren't so familiar, would I automatically believe it? That's a question I've found worth sitting with. And maybe you will too.